Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Building an IT Security Awareness Program That Really Works, brought to you by Dark Reading, KnowBe4 LLC, and broadcast by UBM. I'm Sarah Peters, Senior Editor at Dark Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. And you may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the green folder icon located at the bottom of your screen. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webinar. Just type your questions into the Q&A window to the right of the presentation window, and then click the Submit button. This webinar does contain an audience poll. Please complete the poll when it appears, and it's going to go quickly, so don't think too much about it. It's going to be a flash poll. At the end of the webinar, we will ask you to complete our feedback form. Your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. You can also launch the survey at any time by clicking on the red survey button at the bottom of the console. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now, on to the presentation, Building an IT Security Awareness Program That Really Works. We spend so much money on technology, and then one little phishing message sometimes can render the whole kit almost useless, can it? I'm exaggerating, but not by much, really. Still at Dark Reading, we talk to some security professionals who think that security awareness training for their end users is a waste of time and money. And we speak to others who say they know that it is vital, but what they're doing so far isn't really working. So today we're going to aim to address both of those parties, the believers and the non-believers. And discussing today's topic, we have Michael Osterman. He is principal of Osterman Research, Inc., founded in 2001. And since that time, the company has become one of the leading analyst firms in the messaging and collaboration space, providing research, analysis, white papers, and other services to companies like Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Google, EMC, Symantec, Proofpoint, Dell, and many others. And we have Stu Showerman, the founder and CEO of KnowBe4 LLC, which hosts the world's most popular integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. He's a data security expert with more than 30 years in the IT industry. Showerman was the co-founder of Sunbelt Software, an award-winning anti-malware firm named to Inc. magazine's Inc. 500 fastest-growing private companies, and that was acquired in 2010. So without further ado, Michael, I will send it over to you.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here today, and I'd like to thank everyone who's on the call that really is interested in security awareness training. It's a critical issue and one that all organizations should give a very high priority. Just a little bit about Osterman Research so you understand our perspective in all of this. We're an independent market research and consulting firm, and our focus really is on the way that people communicate and collaborate in a workplace context. So we look essentially at every form of communication and then all of the technologies around that. Things like archiving, encryption, content management, and so forth. And security and security awareness training is an area that we focus on very heavily, for obvious reasons. It has enormous implications for the health of an organization, for its finances, for its ability to protect intellectual property, and so forth. We have a very strong emphasis on primary research. We run our own survey panel, and we'll be presenting a bit of that data here in the presentation today. The company is coming up on 15 years old, and we're based near Seattle. So let's get right into it. We all know that phishing is this enormous problem out there. People are being phished every day. We all receive phishing emails on a daily basis, assuming that they're not somehow filtered out into a spam quarantine somewhere. And in many cases, they're simply not. So we've got this massive problem out there of phishing, and the problem is getting worse really for a variety of reasons. And part of the reason is that in most organizations today, there's some level of security defense, whether it's a secure web gateway, some sort of antivirus software on the desktop, cloud-based filtering, what have you. And typically, the larger the organization, the more layers of defense that are out there. And we have all heard for many, many years that you need a layered defensive strategy. You need stuff in the cloud, you need stuff at the desktop, at the gateway, at the server level, and so forth. And organizations have really taken that to heart, and they have done a very good job at implementing lots of security defenses, and they've spent literally tens of billions of dollars on implementing all of these layers of security. Well, the result is that these technologies have been relatively good, and they've been very good at keeping out a lot of the bad stuff, but they haven't focused on security awareness training, and so cyber criminals are aware that these technologies are quite good, and so now they're going after the weakest link. They're going after the users who have not been trained to recognize phishing attempts, users that can be very gullible sometimes and open things that they shouldn't, click on links, open attachments, what have you. And so bottom line here is that our defenses have now been so good that the attention is turned to the user, and the users are now the weak link, and now the area that organizations really have to focus on if they hope to protect the organization's intellectual property, its finances, keeping malware out of the organization, and so forth. So here's just an example of simple phishing email that I received the other day, this is a fairly obvious one. It talks about now check the account informations. The phone number is wrong. It goes to a spammer site. The verify account information points to a bogus URL. The reply to link is bogus, and so forth. So this is a fairly obvious phishing email, but it's still the kind of phishing email that a lot of people are going to click on. Now, you'll get stuff that is supposedly from PayPal, maybe from FedEx, talking about a delivery of a package. I mean, there are just thousands of different potential opportunities for phishers to try to get into an organization. This is a fairly, easy one to detect, but still one that a lot of users will click on. And the problem really does get worse. This is an example of a ransomware attack or the display of a ransomware attack. And according to the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center, ransomware losses in 2015 were about $18 million for the 15 months ended in mid-2015, $18 million. And this problem is getting worse. We're seeing a lot of ransomware activity. And Stu Sauerman on this call has written a lot about it in his blog and provided some very good information about the risks of ransomware, how organizations are getting trapped in this, and so forth. And there has even been cases where police departments have paid the ransom simply to get their data back. So this is a problem that has affected millions of people, and the problem really is getting worse. And, phishing losses are enormous. According to the Ponemon Institute, for example, a typical 10,000-user company is going to spend about $3.7 million per year dealing with phishing in some way, or about $31 per month per employee. Now, to put this into perspective, if your organization, for example, is migrating to Office 365, that means you're going to have all of your application capabilities, all of your email, all of your instant messaging, and so forth available to each user for anywhere from $15 to $20 a month. So the typical organization is spending about twice that just dealing with phishing, underscoring how serious and how expensive this problem really is. In 2015, for example, according to RSA, U.S. businesses lost about $1.3 billion because of phishing. So again, enormous losses, enormous loss of productivity, and enormous loss of data in many cases. Also, according to the RSA Monthly Online Fraud Report, just in December 2014, there were almost 47,000 phishing attacks worldwide. So this is a problem that is very serious, and it's getting worse for a variety of reasons that we'll go into. Now, part of the problem with phishing is that users typically employ tools that are pretty easy to phish. The two main vectors for phishing, for example, are email and social media. And email continues to be the primary way that people communicate. We hear lots in the trade press that, younger workers entering the workforce use text messaging or social media, that they're just doing away with email and that email is simply going away. That just isn't the case. We did a large email end user study recently, and we found that 44% of users told us that they're using email more now than they were just 12 months ago, and only 9% are using it less. So email is, as we'll show on the next slide, is very commonly used, and it's really here to stay. It's the primary way that people communicate. It's the primary way that they share files back and forth, and so forth. So this is email is a pervasive tool, and it's not going away by any means. We also see social media use growing. Now, not only, sort of the big three of Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, but also lots of other social media properties, as well as enterprise social. Organizations are implementing social media tools to be able to talk to the outside world, to talk to each other, and so forth. And the fundamental issue that we found in our research is that companies just aren't doing enough to protect these two primary channels of communication from phishing attempts. And phishers rely on these channels really to get their stuff across. So, as I noted, users are sending and receiving lots of email. For example, in a typical day, users will send a mean of about 49 emails and receive about 140. So we're looking at, every 3.5 minutes or so, a user is sending or receiving an email. And this creates an enormous opportunity for phishers because now you've got this massive email stream coming in for most users, and in some cases, for some users, it's much greater than this. You've got this massive email stream coming in, and sometimes users can be tricked with good phishing attempts to click on a link or open an attachment, particularly if the timing is good. If you're talking about an open enrollment period for health benefits toward the end of the year, if there are employee reviews coming up, whatever the case may be, the timing can be very good for phishers to be able to get their stuff through and to trick users into opening an attachment or clicking on a link. And what we also find is that email use is increasing over time. We've been asking questions about email use going back to 2008, and as you can see here, the trend line for the number of emails received is increasing at a fairly significant rate, much faster than the rate at which users are sending email. So the green line here really indicates that users are quite vulnerable to phishing attempts simply because there's this massive information that's coming in. And not to belabor the point, but again, users spend a lot of time in email, making them even more vulnerable to phishing attempts. For example, the recent research project that we did showed that users are spending about 3.5 hours a day doing something in email. Now, this doesn't mean that they're sending or receiving for 3.5 hours a day, but email is that single portal, if you will, of content for calendars and tasks and attachments. It's a lot of users' junk drawer for information, and so they use it as this sort of de facto file repository, and they store lots of information in email. We didn't show it in this particular survey, but in past surveys we found that a fairly sizable proportion of users are pack rats, and they preserve lots of information in their email client so that they have this free-form database they can go to access information. And unfortunately, part of what they preserve are phishing emails that potentially can come back to bite the organization later on. We also find that users spend a decent amount of time, using social media, but obviously not nearly as much as email. So what all of this means is that all other things being equal in the organization, increasing use of email simply equates to an increasing opportunity for phishing attack. If you're receiving more emails that are legitimate, that you're using for business purposes, that means there's more of an opportunity to receive phishing emails and create greater risk for the organization. We find, though, that phishing is increasing at a much faster rate than the use of email, and so the risk is really increasing. For example, just a couple here, according to Kaspersky, their anti-phishing system was triggered over 50 million times during the first quarter of 2015, and that was an increase of 1 million times compared to the fourth quarter of 2014. And again, similar type results, as you can note here in the second bullet. So certainly use of email is increasing, but the use of phishing as an attack vector is increasing at a much faster rate. Now, compounding the problem is social media. We find, for example, that users just are sharing way too much on social media. Again, email is the primary phishing threat vector, but social media can also be really quite useful to cyber criminals. And social media really is ideally suited to phishing. There's this trust factor that goes along with social media, as there is with things like instant messaging. You pick your friends on Facebook, you choose people to follow on Twitter, and so forth. And so there's this assumption that if you see something that's posted on social media, it's got to be trustworthy. That is clearly not the case. There are lots of bogus friends on Facebook, lots of bogus followers on Twitter, and so forth. You can go to various tools on the web to find out, just the level of bogus activity there is out there. There are lots of fake ads on Facebook and so forth. So all of these are a potential source. Games, a potential source of fraud because they offer in-app purchases, which can reveal credit card information to a cyber criminal. And also users really seriously overshare information using social media. And that allows phishers and spear phishers the opportunity really to fine-tune their messaging. There's lots of information, for example, on social media that really shouldn't be there. Users tend to share a lot of information that they really shouldn't. One example is geolocation capabilities. It provides information to cyber criminals that is going to make it easier to get through a phishing attack, maybe through email, maybe through a social media channel. So a little bit more about oversharing. As noted, users share just way too much on social media. For example, if there's a CEO that's sharing information about his or her recent visit to a restaurant, and if a phisher sees that and wants to send some sort of a spear phishing attack to that individual, they can send an email with the subject line, there's a problem with your credit card charge at XYZ. Well, since the CEO knew he was there just a few days before, that's the kind of message that he's likely to open, because now it's relevant from a timing perspective, it's relevant from his experience perspective, and so forth. So there's a much greater likelihood that that information is going to be accepted, the attachment opened, the link clicked, and so forth. Also, geolocation data can make it a lot easier for cyber criminals to send targeted emails based on your location. That has happened in a number of cases where people have received information maybe that's relevant to the location they're at a given time. And also, sharing information about affinity groups, whether it's a political organization or a religious organization, what have you, is going to make it easier for cyber criminals to send information to those potential victims with an attachment or a link. And also, we hear a lot about BYOD, which we are really calling the BYO problem, the bring your own, whether it's devices or cloud-based applications or mobile apps, whatever the case may be. What we found in a recent survey is that 2 out of 5 information workers employs their own smartphone for work purposes. And so IT has less control over the content that is sent and received on that device. In many cases, there can be copycat applications if a user goes to a third-party app store, not the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, for example. And so there's a lot of potential for bad stuff to enter an organization through mobile devices. A user, for example, can receive some sort of a phishing request through email on their personally owned mobile device, click on it, and because most users are employing their personal device for work applications like checking work email, that provides an entry point into the organization for organizations that don't protect those mobile devices enough, and there are a lot of them out there. Now, part of the problem is that employers really are making things worse in many cases. Fewer IT departments, for example, are objecting to the use of the bring your own device phenomenon. As you can see here, in 2015, 27% of IT organizations encouraged employees to use their own device. In 2016, that's expected to be 37%. Now, part of the reason, from an IT perspective, that this makes sense is because the cost can be lower for an organization. It can be cheaper to actually just pay somebody a stipend every month instead of providing them with their own phone, largely because when that employee leaves, you don't have to pay it anymore. You don't have to pay for the phone or the plan. And so it can be a lot cheaper to provide just a stipend instead of a device. So organizations really are contributing to the problem with phishing simply because they're not doing enough to protect against the bring your own phenomenon. Now, fundamentally, what we're talking about here today is users. And users tend to be the biggest problem in any organization. They are the weakest link. And again, as noted earlier, that's why cyber criminals are going after them. Now, it's important to note that this is not, an issue of users not being smart, not being careful, and so forth. It's simply that users tend to get overwhelmed with the flood of email that they're receiving. Lots of individuals are just receiving too much content, and so it's difficult for them to take the time to discern without the appropriate training what is a phishing attempt and what is not. We found, for example, in the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report that 23% of recipients are opening phishing messages. That's an enormous number given the large number of messages that are coming into an organization that are bogus. 11% will actually open attachments. Again, a huge figure given the level of threat we're seeing out there. What we also found in the report is the length of time between the launch of a phishing campaign and the first click on the attachment is 82 seconds. That's really an astounding figure because it means that cyber criminals can get results from their efforts almost immediately. They send out the campaign, and less than 2 minutes later, they're starting to get people to click on a link or an attachment. And half of phishing message recipients open them in less than an hour. So bottom line here is that cyber criminals have a ripe field out there for their wares. Users are not appropriately trained. They tend to be a little bit gullible. They tend to be flooded with information through email. They tend to share too much on social media, and so they're really ready for this kind of threat to enter the organization. And part of the problem, too, is that users just aren't sufficiently skeptical. There are some things that users should be doing, asking some basic questions, but they don't have, in most cases, the appropriate training to even start thinking about this, to have the framework for starting to think about the messages that they receive. For example, and I won't go through all the questions, but you need to ask yourself if you receive an email, why have I received an email from somebody I don't know? In a workplace context, that can happen, but it usually won't. And so that needs to sort of raise a yellow flag at least, if not a red one. Does it make sense that this person that's sending me the email would send me an attachment or a link? Again, in many cases, it just doesn't make sense that they would do that. Why is that user's domain misspelled? Again, just a variety of questions that users need to be trained about so that they can appropriately view emails that they're receiving with the right amount of skepticism. And users today, in many cases, just are not skeptical enough about the content they're receiving. And the bottom line is that users need to be trained not to be gullible. And again, just to stress, this is not about intelligence. This is not about users being careful. This is simply about users being fooled because they don't have the appropriate level of security awareness training. So do you need to implement security awareness training? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. We recommend it highly. Users of the first line of defense in any security system, regardless of the level of cloud filtering you have, secure web gateways, what have you, users absolutely need to be that first line of defense. And the number of reasons for that. First, email use is increasing, and so there are going to be more and more opportunities for phishing to enter the organization. Also, information workers spend only 7% of their day not using a mobile device, not using a computer, and so forth. So we're looking at many hours a day during which they can be exposed to these kinds of threats and potentially can allow malware or other problems to enter the organization. Also, the vast majority of information workers really do experience information overload. They just don't have the time to appropriately evaluate every single email if they don't have the right training. And users tend to be less skeptical than they should be. There's a lot of trust out there, but it's a lot of misplaced trust that shouldn't exist. And also the whole BYO problem gives IT departments a lot less control than they used to have when they could control all of the channels through which users communicated or collaborated. That just isn't the case anymore. The problem, though, is that we found that more than 1/3 of information workers have not gone through any sort of formal security awareness training. We did this survey in January, and we found that a very sizable proportion of users have never gone through any sort of security awareness training at all. We found, for example, that fewer than 2/3 have actually done so. So this, at its core level, is the fundamental problem. Users aren't getting any sort of security awareness training, and they're not sufficiently skeptical, so they're left wide open to phishing attempts and the opportunity for bad things to happen in the organization. Also, we found that even among the organizations that were, providing users with some level of security awareness training, whatever that might be, it's just not sufficiently frequent. We found that 7 out of 10 individuals who have gone through some sort of security awareness training do so only once per year or even less often. In many cases, as you can see here, it's just when they join the organization. So a single security awareness training exercise can provide some value, but it's simply not going to provide enough. And what we're finding here is that the vast majority are just not getting enough training. And phishers, continue to change their wares. They continue to change their tactics. And so it's important to keep users up to date with this training. But most organizations, even if they have implemented some sort of training, just aren't doing enough of it. So next steps, certainly for users, be absolutely skeptical of all of the emails that you receive, especially if they have something unusual about them. Maybe there's a threat somewhere in the email, like your computer has been exposed to some sort of a virus. If they have offers that are too good to be true, I see this all the time. I mean, lots of offers in email. You see certainly lots of offers on social media. Certainly don't overshare personal information. It's the fodder that can be used for phishers to create their wares that can be even more effective in the future. Don't click on links or open any sort of attachment unless you have absolute certainty that that's a valid attachment or it's a valid link. And then check the bona fides of all of the emails that you receive. Even if it appears to be valid, maybe it's not. It might be a phishing attempt. Some phishing attempts are really very, very good and much more difficult to detect than others. At the organization level, particularly for IT departments, you need to implement some sort of a robust security awareness training program as soon as possible. Again, users are that first line of defense. You need to train them appropriately so that you can prevent lots of bad stuff happening before it can have implications for your network or your data. You need to ensure that new employees go through training right away. It should be the first order of business as they enter the organization. And then you need to maintain a program of ongoing training to ensure that users, networks, and all of your data assets are properly protected. Okay, and that concludes my part of the presentation. Here's our contact information. Sarah, I'm going to hand the floor back to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's Michael Osterman of Osterman Research. Now, very shortly, I am going to hand it over to Stu Showerman, the founder and CEO of KnowBe4. But first, we've got a little job for those of you in the audience. Here's that polling question I was talking about. It is, how would you best describe how your organization currently does security awareness training? Is it we do nothing and rely on our filters? Do we have kind of a break room thing where we just herd all of our users once a year into the break room, give them a little bit of awareness training? Is it a monthly thing with a short security video? Phishing tests to just the high-risk employees? Or is it a really strong human firewall scenario where you train all of your employees online and send frequent phishing attacks as a test? Answer now. While we're waiting, Stu, what do you anticipate the response is going to be here? I know that we, of course, hope that the answer, that the majority is not going to be we do nothing and rely on our filters, but what do you anticipate?
We've actually asked our customers this many, many times, and it depends on the size of the organization. We find roughly 20% rely on their filters, another 30% do the break room. A section does the short videos. Phishing tests starts to get more popular. The human firewall, we generally get between 5 and 10% total. It's going to be interesting to see what this group here is going to answer.
Now, 5 to 10% is actually a little bit more promising than I would have anticipated. So that's promising. Has that
Yes.
improved over the past few years?
It is. We cover by now almost 3,000 enterprise accounts that actually use this. It is an up-and-coming type approach, simply driven by the need, because cybercrime has gone pro over the last 5 years.
That is for certain. All right, well, let's see how our attendees here did. Well, okay, we've got 18.2%. That's about what you said, that do nothing and rely on our filters. But look at that, 25.5% who train all of their employees online and send frequent phishing attacks. Bravo, audience. You are ahead of the game. At least 25.5% of you are. Well, with that, I'm going to pass it right on over to Stu Showerman for more.
Thank you. Great to be here. So what does a good awareness program look like? Well, 25% of you are indeed already using the human firewall approach, which is what we have been working on for the last 5 years. Often people do this for compliance reasons, and we all know that compliance does not equate to security. It also is not quite yet clear for C-level execs that this is a true problem that needs to be addressed before they see their company on the headlines of Wall Street Journal for another hack. So the old style, herd your users in the break room, keep them awake with coffee and donuts, and expose them by death by PowerPoint for 20 minutes just doesn't hack it anymore. So you want a coordinated campaign. Training by itself needs to be reinforced. So once a year, stepping people through, a 10, 15, 20-minute, maybe a 30-minute online training is a good idea, but on its own, it doesn't do the trick. You can identify high-risk users and groups of them and send them phishing attacks, and then when they fail, that you do a remedial training. That is kind of the next best thing. But ideally, you do a baseline test of your whole organization. And yes, if you're really large, that can be a problem. Then you step everyone through online, on-demand, engaging training. And step 3 is frequent simulated phishing attacks. I'm talking once a month. That keeps users on their toes with security top of mind. And we have done a test over 300,000 users over 12 months. And if you look at the graph to the right, we find that if you look at it over very large numbers, the average phish-prone percentage is about 16%. Then you train them, and it takes a few months to get everyone through their mandatory, ideally, training program. And then 12 months later, your phish-prone percentage drops to, just over 1%. And we've done several studies, and this trend pans out. It really is in reality. This is how it works. If you send monthly frequent phishing attacks. So in order to create that security culture, we thoroughly have seen in our own experience that you need to train everyone. The break room is just as important as the boardroom because the hackers don't care. They just go after the low-hanging fruit. And if the break room turns out to be, the lunchroom, you're really talking about people that are low on the totem pole. If they can be hacked, they will get in, and it's over. If you are looking at boardroom, the very high-level people, they tend to have much more access, so they would be automatically have a target on their back. We have found that very often those people are the most prolific clickers, so you have a challenge there. What really needs to be done is, especially those people, they need to understand spam, phishing, spear phishing, malware, ransomware, social engineering. Those concepts need to be clear. If you are able to do that, you will find a behavior change. And that is ultimately what we are trying to get to. There is an enlightenment step. Call it, definitely education. They don't know how, and you do know, but they don't know how dangerous it is out on the internet. So the bad guys have become very sophisticated. We see very interesting attacks on a daily basis. The easy way is to automate this whole process and to send them simulated attacks. What we do is we have campaigns where people are being put in a group, and this group gets sent 20 different templates, and every template gets sent on at a different time. So we call this random or double random. So nobody gets the same phishing attack at the same time, so they can't pop up and warn each other, hey, don't click on that link. We also find that making these attacks a little more personal increases the click rates significantly. So you could grab the name of the bank that is being used. What we are currently doing is we're having a current event template. Peyton Manning found unresponsive, which is directly related to the Super Bowl. And our customers send that to their employees and click with, at this moment in time, dismal results, very high click rates. But that is exactly where we want them to be. So the latest social engineering tactics and current event templates, that is the way you keep them literally on their toes. So here's an example. An email gets received by the employee, PDF or a doc. The body of the email has no malicious links, and there's only a ruse. There's a social engineering attack. The document that attached itself is not malicious either. No exploits, no scripts. The only thing that the user sees is another embedded link in the document, and that leads to an exploit site. So this goes through your filters. There is nothing actually bad in this thing, and filters generally do not scan the links inside the attachment. So it winds up in your user's inbox. We've done some testing. This is testing with data entry analysis. Okay, you're getting an email to log into Office 365 or your Gmail account. And people click through, and then we see who actually enters data and who doesn't. And interestingly enough, almost twice as many guys enter their data compared to gals. So there are differences in your, call it user community, and there's more to that. There's more depth. Some departments like customer support, HR, sometimes marketing, sales, these people are hired for, okay, they're sociable, they are supposed to help people. These are the people that are the biggest targets. So you have to focus on those high-risk groups in particular and put your baseline in, get your phish-prone percentage, ideally per group or per territory or per company. If you're really large, you have a series of working companies. Those are the people you focus on. You create campaigns, you train them, you phish them, you analyze your phishing data, and you train them again. We have hundreds of templates, and we've essentially graded these by difficulty level. So we recommend you start with difficulty level 1 and basically drive down the phish-prone percentage. And then you start with difficulty level 2 and do the same thing. So over time, you continue to increase the challenge, if you will. there are some resources that you can use at this point in time. There's a free phishing security test we provide. We also have a free Fish Alert button for Outlook. This is something that you can implement in your own organization. If your user sees something fishy, they can click on the link. The email gets deleted out of their inbox and goes to your incident response team. So you get immediate warnings if there is a targeted spear phishing attack for your organization. We can also scan the whole internet for all email addresses that are from your domain name and where we found them. And there's often very interesting sites where we dig out those email addresses. And then there's, of course, some white papers you can get. That is the end of my section, and I'm giving the floor back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Stu. Really appreciate that. Now, we are going to very shortly begin with our Q&A section. But before we do that, you have a feedback form to fill out. It's going to be opening on your machine just about now. If your pop-up blockers have prevented the form from launching on your computer, you can click the red survey icon on the bottom of your screen. And to complete the form, just please press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of your page. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in that survey really does allow us to better serve you. And now, without further ado, on to the Q&A portion of our event. Now, as a reminder, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen and then click the Submit button. Okay, I have a question to start out here, gentlemen. First of all, Stu, you started to touch on this a little bit at the end of your presentation. Is it important to have different kinds of awareness training for different kinds of employees? Should you focus it in on certain departments so that the HR people get something a little bit different, the sales people get something a little bit different, the executives get something a bit different than the people actually manning the phones do, or what? What's your recommendation? You want to take that one first, Michael?
Yeah.
Or Stu? Whichever one. You both started talking at the same time.
Let me go in first, and I'll give it back to Michael in a second. Ideally, yes. However, that is hard to do, and most of these people are exposed to the same attack vectors. So you can, and which is what we've done. We've looked at, what are by far the most used attack vectors, and create one training that everyone can step through. Anything else, Mike?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that certainly there are different levels of threat that are faced. For example, the CFO of a company, it manages more critical information, and so they are more subject, for example, to a spear phishing attempt that's going to install some sort of a keystroke logger through malware or a phishing attempt. But yeah, I mean, if you can tailor it to the job specifications and the kinds of data that people are dealing with, that's ideal, but it's not necessarily a really easy thing to do. We recommend, obviously, security awareness training for every level in the organization, anybody that touches email or social media, but if it can be tailored, so much the better.
Excellent. I have several people here wondering, how do you handle multinational organizations? How do you train employees on a global scale? One of our attendees here has a company that requires at least 8 languages to have mandatory training. How do you combat that with phishing simulations and training?
I'll be happy to answer that one. The training itself is not that hard to translate, and most companies in this field have multilingual options. We have 9 languages. If you are in an enterprise environment that does truly, 5, 6 continents, generally speaking, the business language is English, and the vast majority of the phishing attacks are in English. So for the frequent simulated attacks, yes, you can translate them, but English is still the leading language which you should use.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the vast majority of the content that you're going to receive is in English. But what's interesting is that the bad phishing attempts are, very often from non-English speakers. You'll notice a lot of bad English in the messages. So, and the quality of phishing attacks really varies, quite a bit. Some are very easy to spot, others not so much. Particularly for spear phishing, where the cyber criminal has actually studied their victim. They're going after a company CEO, the CFO, the COO, and so forth.
Now, what about non-phishing attacks? I mean, obviously we talk a lot about that because that's such a key factor these days. But there are other things we need to train users about, right? There's other kinds of social engineering. There are social media use policies. There are simply don't leave your mobile device in the wrong place. What advice do you have for training users on those kinds of things as well? Michael, you want to take that one first?
Sure. We recommend, fairly comprehensive training on a variety of things. Certainly, about encrypting your laptop, encrypting your mobile device, not doing dumb things like just taking any USB drive you get at a conference and sticking it in to your computer and so forth. So there's a lot of best practices that users should be trained on. And, we also recommend, certainly obviously security awareness training, but also just the stuff that's related to that. For example, it's easy to divulge sensitive information in an organization by revealing non-sensitive information. There was a case, I was speaking to a security company some time back, and an executive from that company was making frequent trips to Minneapolis. And somebody finally asked her, are you guys going to be doing a deal with Best Buy? And the fact was, yes, they were working on a deal with Best Buy, and because she was tweeting all of this information about her frequent trips to Minneapolis, somebody put two and two together based on her geolocation information and said, okay, you must be doing this deal. So you can reveal a lot of sensitive information through innocuous ways, geolocation, just tweeting where you're going, what you're doing, and so forth. So, really training has to focus on this really wide variety of areas and really help to instill common sense and privacy best practices into what users do on a daily basis.
Great.
Nothing to add.
Nothing
Nope.
to add? Okay. Mike, you did a fantastic job answering that question, I guess. This is a key one right here. How do you sell the idea of more funding for security awareness in the boardroom? Because sometimes metrics are a difficult thing to get when it comes to proving that security awareness actually works.
Yeah, we deal with that pretty much on a daily basis. It is to a large degree driven by, return on investment and being able to provide graphs that show that there is a very good ROI. And I'm actually clicking back on one particular graph that we had early in the slides. If you can show management that there is actually an improvement, visible, statistically significant, less clicks, that actually causes operational expenses to go down as well, because in many cases, if an infection is bad enough, that means wiping the machine, rebuilt from scratch. That is cost. There's downtime. There's IT time involved. It is actually not so hard to come up with a good justification and a business case for the human firewall approach.
I would say too. That probably, if you tell them about those BEC phishing attacks, that would get them scared. Stu, you had told me a bit about those offline. Do you want to take a second just to throw a few figures out about how much money people have lost?
It's the FBI recently came out with a report at $1.2 billion. That is was lost over the last 18 months through what they call business email exposure, of what we call CEO fraud. These are highly targeted, CEO-focused spear phishing attacks in the sense that the CEO gets spoofed. And the attack is on people in accounting. And they get, essentially, first they fall for a phishing attack. Their machines get infected. Keylogger sits there, or Trojan. The bad guys lurk for a couple of months, and they wait for the CEO to go on a trip. And then the attack starts with a spoofed CEO email address with, hey, I need you to urgently transfer $300,000 over to this so-and-so bank in China. We're doing an acquisition. And accounting people fall for this at very high rates. And so just the prevention of a CEO fraud attack pays for an awareness program 5 times over.
Yeah, individual companies getting losing multi-millions of dollars just to phishing. It's pretty. Tell your CEO about that. You'll get your funding overnight. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, if you do a search on phishing related to corporate losses, you'll see lots of examples, and we have losses examples of those we can send you as well. And very often it'll hit mid-sized organizations, churches, school districts, organizations that maybe don't have as sophisticated an approach to IT as they need to. They don't do security awareness training. They don't have the defenses in place. And very often you'll get these kinds of phishing attacks that are really quite successful. And there have been cases where an organization has lost a few $100,000 out of its bank account within 30 minutes because the CFO clicked on a phishing attempt, it installed a keystroke logger, and literally within a half hour they've had their bank account drained. Now, in many cases, they can get the money back because they can stop the wire transfer. In many cases, they can't. There have also been cases where companies have sued the bank has, has countersued. It can get very messy very quickly. And in many ways, I mean, it's not going to work, obviously, with every board of directors or every, group of senior managers. But this is almost like a life insurance play. It's saying, implement this security awareness training to dramatically reduce your chance of this really bad result. And, sometimes that will work as a way of selling the, security awareness training program. Sometimes it won't, but, there are obviously going to be different approaches for different management and so forth. But, this is something that you, in IT, you absolutely have to sell to management.
Now, on that topic, what kind of costs are people looking at when they're talking about awareness training? Do we have any scope on what people are investing and what they ought to be investing?
I have some rough figures. What we find that on average, people take a subscription. For instance, for organizations up to 1,000 employees, it's $9 per user per year. If you're in the 3,000 to 5,000 users, it's $6 per user per year, and it even goes lower than that. That is for the silver package. For the platinum package, those numbers are $13.50 and $9 per user per year. So it is the cost isn't all that much. You do have to factor in the time, and that is why we fully automated the whole process. This is upload users, 5 clicks, and you have a campaign running. You have to do practically nothing else. So this thing was essentially built by IT for IT. That's a ballpark.
Well, and compare that with the Ponemon statistics I presented earlier that show the cost of phishing attacks is $31 per user per month. Just the cost of the phishing itself is dramatically higher than the cost of the training. Yep.
Wow. Okay, well, I think we have time for at least one more question here, and I have one. Do you think that in addition to the technology that we have at our disposal now, that face-to-face training is also important, because I will never forget once upon a time. This is going back a long way in my cybersecurity history, but some awareness professional that I knew was trying to teach a government agency about the lesson of what somebody who just drops it right out of the sky might be able to learn, all the sensitive information they might be able to learn about that agency just from the stuff that employees casually, carelessly left around the office unattended. And in order to convey this message, he and his security staff dressed up as aliens for the day and just wandered around the office and then presented to their to the rest of the people in the office the extent of what they were able to find, and told them about the lesson about the importance of a clean desk, something that I myself have never really learned that lesson. My desk is a mess. But things like that, do you think that there's still a real importance of that, even as we have bigger and more spread out companies? Is that face-to-face training still important?
Mike?
I think there's some value in that. Certainly it's not going to be as efficient from a cost perspective or a time investment perspective, but I think there is some value in that. If you have a peer in a department, for example, that can come alongside and say, look at this phishing email. Look for the signs that it's bogus. Things of that nature. Just the goal really is to make people more skeptical of things that potentially could cause harm to the organization. So any way you do that is going to have value. What it boils down to is, how efficient is it, particularly for large numbers of users when you repeat this, on a regular basis.
Yes. My partner, Kevin Mitnick, they do this for a living. They red team and essentially attack the organization in person, walking in, with a Dickies and a clipboard and a tool belt, and ask for the server room. And a bunch of the times they get let in straight away because, hey, the phone line needs to be fixed. So yes, that is part of an assessment. However, getting that type of message across a whole user population in a large organization, you have to go web and on demand whenever they can do it.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both so much for your time today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up for the day?
I would just offer that, certainly, it's fairly easy to convince IT decision makers, business decision makers about the value of things like secure web gateways, anti-malware solutions and so forth. You need to put the same level of fervor, if you want to call it that, into security awareness training, because I think that in too many organizations out there, users are not regarded as that first line of defense, and they really need to be. It's absolutely essential as part of any security posture.
Yes, agreed. You need to create a security culture. Ideally, this needs to be driven C-level on down. And that is, board members these days are getting very concerned about cybersecurity. It is one of the things that they discuss every board meeting. And getting C-level air cover and taking it from there is much easier these days.
Great. Thank you both, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure and very educational for me, as well as I imagine for everybody else in the audience. And thank you all for attending. For more information related to today's webinar, please visit any of the resource links available in the green folder icon at the bottom of your screen. And within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Building an IT Security Awareness Program That Really Works, brought to you by Dark Reading and KnowBe4 LLC. This webinar is copyright 2016 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and KnowBe4 LLC, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Michael Osterman, Principal of Osterman Research, Inc., and Stu Showerman, Founder and CEO of KnowBe4 LLC. I'm Sarah Peters, Senior Editor here at Dark Reading. Thanks for your time, and have a great day. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Building an IT Security Awareness Program That Really Works, brought to you by Dark Reading, KnowBe4 LLC, and broadcast by UBM. I'm Sarah Peters, Senior Editor at Dark Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. And you may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the green folder icon located at the